You're about to witness a rare instance where Dr. Jordan Peterson is in the same room with Dr. Phil to discuss his new book, and that's when Dr. Peterson really takes this opportunity to press Dr. Phil on his belief in God, which leads to a rather interesting conversation about faith and science. I'm going to let this video play out, and then I'm going to give my thoughts on the back end. Let's get into it.
And so with regard to faith, how do you negotiate that? You're a scientifically oriented thinker as well. And so when you're making the case that if faith is under attack, we're in trouble, how do you justify that claim?
Well, for me, I think there are some things that we know. There are some things we don't know. There are some things that we can't know, and we have to kind of sort those out. And that's where faith comes in. I think back, scientifically, there was a time that we didn't have the instrumentation to see a molecule. That didn't mean it didn't exist. We just didn't have the instrumentation to observe it. And I'm the same way about what you were saying about thoughts. I guess if I was going to categorize myself value-wise from a professional standpoint, it would lean more toward cognitive behaviorist than anything. And in cognitive behaviorism, we treat thoughts as behaviors because they are observable to a public of one. And so the fact that it is an observable event, even if to just a public of one, I tend to treat those as behaviors. So I think we have to look at what our thoughts are and think about, okay, we see this. Are we being rational in our thought? Are we not being rational in our thought? And to me, it's not irrational to recognize that we are not all knowing. We are not the repository of all knowledge, and to assume that just because we can't show you faith on an x-ray, like we can a broken leg, is the same thing about depression. People don't understand how psychometrics work. They think we're measuring depression, and in fact, we're not. What we're doing is saying, we're going to give you these psychometrics, and what we're going to do is tell you that you have an awful lot in common with people who have been observed to be depressed. They have higher suicidality. They spend more time crying. They spend more time with flat affect or whatever. So we can't tell you you're depressed, but we can tell you answered these items consistent with an awful lot of people who are depressed and that we have observed. And so, again, there's a certain extrapolation from that we have to rely on. We can't measure it like we do with an x-ray or an MRI with a brain scan. And it's not a big leap to me to say that I do have faith. I am a Christian. I've never seen a conflict between that and my approach to science. I just look at this as something that we don't yet have observable measurement for, just like we didn't for the molecule or other smaller units of function. So I don't have trouble reconciling that, but I guess I take it on faith, which is kind of defining something by itself. And I know that's circular in nature, but it works for me, and I think an awful lot of people find comfort in the belief system that there is a higher power that I choose to call God that is kind of involved in our lives on as active a basis as we want to acknowledge. And I'm one of those Christians, Jordan, that believes in pray to God but row for the shore. So that's why I don't see it as conflict. I'm still going to do everything I can do. I'm still going to work as hard as I can work. I'm going to do everything because I believe that if there is a God, and I believe there is, then I think I've been given certain gifts, talents, skills, abilities, and free will to do what I can and will do. So to me, I don't see that there is equity in creating a conflict between science and faith.
So I'm going to elaborate on the faith idea here too, because you pointed out that because we're ignorant, we we have to rely on our judgment to move forward. And we're permanently ignorant because we actually can't predict the future. The future is actually not predictable. The world is not deterministic, and we know this for a number of reasons, many of which are scientific. So we have to move forward in faith. And so the monotheistic hypothesis is that there's an ultimate unity, and also that that's what we should have faith in. And so I want to run something by you, and you tell me what you think about this. So there's an autobiographical account in the Gospels of one of Christ's reactions to a particular question. And so he's being tormented by the scribes and the Pharisees and the lawyers. So nothing's really changed. The Pharisees are hypocrites, the scribes are academics, and the lawyers, well, they're still lawyers. And what they're essentially trying to do continually in the gospel account is to trap Christ into making a heretical statement so that they can have him arrested and destroyed. And so they're attempting to reputation savage, essentially. And so at one point, this is a very famous scene, and I'm sure you know it, one of his opponents challenges Jesus to describe which of the commandments is the primary commandment. And the hope there is that he'll pick one, and by picking one will denigrate the others, and because he's denigrating the others in comparison, they can bring him up on charges of heresy. And he says something quite remarkable. He says that the 10 Commandments are manifestations of an underlying unity of moral conceptualization, and that they circulate around a particular theme. And the theme, you can express the theme quite concisely in a twofold manner. You should aim at what's best, God. You should align yourself with the highest possible aim. That's number one. So that orients you. And then number two, you should treat other people as you would like to be treated. You should put yourself in their position and work for that harmonious unity that would emerge if you treated other people the way you would want to be treated if you were treating yourself properly. So it's interesting. So really what he's doing, it's so interesting. He's taking a cloud of conception, which is the 10 Commandments, which were themselves derived from an analysis. It's an analysis, like you said, you conducted in some ways by listening to the tens of thousands of comments that you've received from the people who've been watching and listening to what you've been doing. You accumulated all of this cries from the people, let's say. You derive a set of principles as a consequence of that, but those principles themselves orient around something that's central. That central point of orientation, I think, is equivalent to God, and it's also equivalent to what we should have faith in.
Dr. Phil made two key points here that I want to touch on a little bit further. Number one, faith in God and science are not at odds with each other, but actually complement each other. And number two, faith in God is not God of the gaps, which is when you can't explain something or you don't understand, so you just say, therefore, God did it. Some people are pretty hesitant to believe in God because they're afraid it involves throwing out all your rationality, follow the sky daddy in the sky blindly, but that's just not the case. Thankfully, as Dr. Phil has pointed out, there are many famous scientists throughout history. Isaac Newton, Gregor Mendel, he's the father of genetics, and Werner Heisenberg, he helped pioneer quantum physics. These are all great men and scientists who believed in God, among many others. And additionally, some people believe that if we understand all how the universe works, then there isn't a God. But what they're doing is they're confusing mechanism for agency, as John Lennox has pointed out in the past. Take the Ford motor car, for example. If we understand how it works, the motors, the mechanisms all behind it, there's still a creator behind it, Henry Ford. And God, with the creation of the universe, operates in the exact same way. And as Dr. Phil has pointed out, there are things that we know, things that we don't know, and things that we can't know. Now, the things that we can't know are heavily debated, and for good reason, but some, I believe, are love, consciousness, and the origin of life. I believe that they all can't be explained adequately without a transcendent being. Now, skeptics like Richard Dawkins, they'll say, oh, this is just a cop-out. What you're doing is you believe in God because you don't understand how these things work, and so you're making this conclusion out of ignorance. And I think he is somewhat valid for this, because all throughout history, there have been times that religious institutions have fallen victim to this. You remember when we used to think that the earth was the center of the universe? Well, they used a Bible verse in the book of Joshua to help justify this through trying to jam their explanation from the text. So I can see that there's a lot of church hurt from the past from this happening. But I'd argue that now in the present day, we're no longer operating from a place of ignorance, but from a position of positive evidence. There's philosophical evidence, historical evidence, scientific evidence, all that supports a belief in God. And now, if you want to hear specifically about those pieces of evidence I'm talking about, I recommend checking out the video on screen right about here. It should be a good start to find what you're looking for. Have a great day.